Hi, everybody. Welcome to Resistance Live. It's the 15th of May, 2025. Kind of a crazy morning. There's a lot going on. We're going to talk about the birthright citizenship case, which is still an ongoing oral argument in front of the Supreme Court this morning, as well as this newly revived idea that Derek Chauvin should be pardoned. We first talked about this all the way back in March. So I'm going to explain it all to you again and also tell you that I think we're going to have to deal with it as it comes, if it comes, and I'm not sure it's actually coming. All right. Today, for our visually challenged viewers, I'm wearing a white V-neck t-shirt. My hair is down. I'm a pink-skinned, green-eyed, dirty, blonde-haired woman, and I am in front of my bookshelf and my yellow standing cart in my office, and I'm coming to you, as always, from occupied Muncie, Lenape, and Mohegan land. Okay, so today, and this is what has kind of kicked this whole thing off again, Marjorie Taylor Greene posted something on X saying that she thought Derek Chauvin should be pardoned because she claimed completely falsely, I'm going to repeat it, but I'm just going to say this again, completely fabricatedly falsely, that George Floyd died of a drug overdose. That's false. We all know it because, we saw it live on camera. One of the things that I need people to remember here, though, before people get kind of like outraged and take this bait, is that Trump initially signaled back in March that he might be open to pardoning Derek Chauvin, and then he rolled it back. And in fact, went on the record saying, no, I'm not going to do that. That doesn't mean it's not on the table again, but it does mean that there's at least been one statement where he's like, I'm not doing that. The second thing I want people to be aware of is that, as we have discussed here many, many times, presidents only have the power to pardon federal convictions. Derek Chauvin has been convicted of both state and federal charges. The federal charges he's been convicted of are violations of George Floyd's civil rights. Derek Chauvin is currently serving a sentence for those federal crimes in Texas. However, he was also convicted of murder in state court in Minnesota and sentenced to 22 and a half years in prison under state law. Now, today, because this is obviously like a little bit front and center, there has been some new reporting out of Minnesota covering the positions of Governor Tim Walz and the Attorney General of Minnesota and various other officials inside the Minnesota state government. And their position is very clear, and it couldn't be any other way, which is that if Trump does pardon Derek Chauvin, they're prepared to go get him from the federal prison in Texas and bring him back to Minnesota to serve out the remainder of his 22 and a half year sentence for murder. So I want to make it really clear to everybody that there's no way Derek Chauvin is getting out. He is not going to be pardoned for state crimes because he can't be, and he will serve out the remainder of his time in state prison in the event that Trump pardons him on the federal crimes. Now, does that mean there's not going to be outrage from this? No. Does it mean there might not be civil unrest? No. There is speculation floating around right now in various circles that Trump might be trying to drum up some more drama because that's what he likes, and some fear that he might do it to give himself a basis for invoking the Insurrection Act. Now, I have to tell you guys something, because I have these moments where I see people kind of like flipping out about the potential invocation of the Insurrection Act. And I have to tell you all to kind of take a step back and breathe, all right? Because even if hypothetically, let's just say hypothetically, there are huge protests in Minneapolis after a pardon of Derek Chauvin. And there's also some bad actors there, like there were during the George Floyd uprising in 2020, from white supremacist groups who pretend to be aligned with the protests, who set fire to things and smash windows and the like. Okay, we saw all of this happen during the 2020 uprising. Will Trump use that as an excuse to invoke the Insurrection Act? Maybe. But I have to remind you all that an invocation of the Insurrection Act is not like untouchable. And one of the things, again, that I think people need to be really aware of before they have the kind of like panic is that an invocation of the Insurrection Act can be challenged in court. And we've all seen how injunctions and preliminary restraining orders have been issued. I'm going to remind you all that he tried to declare a federal emergency during the first term at the border, and that was shot down in court. So nobody should be running around having, there's this funny kind of panic that happens when people start thinking about things like quote unquote martial law. Right? Which, as we've talked about here, is kind of like a misnomer, right? What we're talking about when we talk about martial law in the United States is the invocation of the Insurrection Act. Even if he does that, we don't know what it's going to look like. We don't know what it's going to mean. And I don't think it's going to stand up in court. So, this is a good moment to remember that so much of what the administration is doing right now is designed to silence people and scare them into submission. All right. He invokes the Insurrection Act. He's going to do it whether he has a justification for it or not. And, one of the things that we all need to kind of prepare ourselves for is that he could kind of pick any given thing, right? Like he's trying to claim right now that there's an invasion over the southern border, even though border crossings are down by I think the last time I read it, more than 80%. So he doesn't need a reason to do it. And if he invokes it, we're going to see what happens and it'll be challenged in court. All right. But the thing I want you all to take away from this is that part of the reason for signaling this is to take away attention from other things. All right. And Marjorie Taylor Greene, as we all know, is crazy. Okay, we don't even know if she's saying what she's saying with the consent of the Trump administration or not. So the way in which, again, this is a good moment to remind everybody that social media makes profit off your outrage. And one of the things at moments like this that it's really important to remember is that the Republicans are much better at this than Democrats. I'm just going to be honest about it. They are really, really good at pushing a button that they know is going to cause outrage, firing it off on social media and watching literally everybody go squirrel over here, right? As opposed to talking about, for instance, the Qatari jet, which has been dominating the news cycle for the last 3 days, or Trump's arms deal with Saudi Arabia, about which there has been relatively little coverage comparatively. Or, for instance, the fact that this morning in front of the Supreme Court, they're arguing for the elimination of nationwide injunctions in the guise of arguing against birthright citizenship. All of these things are things that are actually happening in real time, as opposed to something that could happen, right, down the road that might have an outcome that is unpredictable. And that outcome, might not even survive. Okay. So again, Derek Chauvin is not going to be released from prison one way or another. And also the signaling of this is designed to do other things. Okay. And I will tell you, if he's pardoned on federal civil rights charges, it will be outrageous. There will be a legitimate basis for people to be in the streets. And also he doesn't need a reason to invoke the Insurrection Act. So people just need to be very thoughtful and nuanced in the way that you approach all of this when things like this happen. Okay. And the number one thing to consider, as always, when you see something like this is who benefits if it's true? What's the aim of the amplification of this? Right. Because we already know they're neo-Nazi racists, right? We already know that they've spread horrible lies about George Floyd from the very beginning. Right. And so it's worth asking why now, let alone when he rejected this in March. Why is it being floated again? Okay, so let's talk for a second about the birthright citizenship oral argument that's currently still ongoing in front of the Supreme Court, or at least was when I went live. I want people to understand the posture of this case, because what they're not actually resolving today, or when they issue an opinion between now and the end of the term in June, what they're not actually resolving is whether or not birthright citizenship remains constitutional. Okay, because by the way, as Ketanji Brown Jackson and other people have pointed out, there's Supreme Court precedent on this going back 127 years. What they've done in the guise of this case is challenge the ability of district court judges to issue nationwide preliminary injunctions. And why are they doing that? Because they don't like the fact that federal judges of all stripes, nominated by Republicans and Democrats, are issuing nationwide injunctions against their worst, most illegal policies. And so what they're trying to do is get the Supreme Court to rule that injunctions can only be issued within a given state or within, the jurisdiction of a given district court. They've been pilloried on this largely by at least 7 justices this morning. And the attorney arguing on behalf of the Trump administration has been bumbling and unable to answer questions sometimes, even from, not so big brain trusts like Kavanaugh. Now, does that mean that it's going to go our way? No, we won't know how this case goes until the answer to it comes out. But I'm going to tell you that the issue of the way in which injunctions have been handled historically, there are people out there this morning like Clarence Thomas going, oh, well, we didn't really have nationwide preliminary injunctions until 1960. Well, you know what? the point being made this morning is that there's no way to actually stop the Trump administration's illegal activity unless there is the ability to issue preliminary injunctions, because otherwise they can defy the law. And as I think Justice Kagan said this morning, it will be a catch me if you can kind of scenario wherever they decide they're going to break it. And that's not the way our federal judicial system is supposed to work. So again, we're not going to know how the ruling comes out until it comes out. But I also want people to understand that there's like huge debates right now, even among the Supreme Court justices, about why they didn't bring birthright citizenship itself before the Supreme Court. That preliminary issue, even though it's the main issue in the case, is not currently before SCOTUS. And that's because, by the way, as Ketanji Brown Jackson and others have pointed out this morning, the government is losing in every jurisdiction where birthright citizenship is brought before the courts. They actually, I don't think, want it before the Supreme Court. Because if they put it before the Supreme Court's going to say like, hey, it's right here written down that if you're born in the United States under the Constitution, you are a citizen. So again, this is one of those situations where the nuance of this is significant and important. And also where I want people to understand that while I know sometimes listening in on these Supreme Court oral arguments can feel difficult, you know, Alito was pounding the bench a lot today. Whatever. I'm so tired of his nonsense. Nonetheless, there are some real indications of cracks in the DOJ position on this. And frankly, I think that we've seen really great oral argument from the Attorney General of New Jersey and from others about why it is that preliminary injunctions need to stand nationwide. So we'll see what happens with that one. I mean, again, we likely won't have a ruling on this because it's so significant between now and the end of the term, which of course is at the end of June, sometimes dribbles over until the first few days of July. All right. Somebody asked me a question today about protesting and where things are working and what should we know about. All right. So I have to tell you all that coming on in our Monday new educational series, I'm doing a breakdown of why Tesla takedown has been so successful. And I'm doing it through the lens of showing all of you, teaching all of you the strategies that have been most effective about Tesla takedown so you can apply them to whatever your direct action and local organizing will be going forward. All right. Because Tesla takedown has been monumentally successful. And it's a model now for how other things can be done. It is continuing. It will continue. But I have to say, I see it as one of the most successful movements that have been built in a very short-term window of time that I've witnessed in my lifetime, you know, since I started organizing protests at the age of 15. And so that educational video is going to drop on Monday, and it's going to take you through all the reasons why Tesla takedown has been successful and what your big lessons and takeaways should be from that. While we're on the topic, though, of consumer boycotts and direct action, I do want to mention something about Avelo Airlines, because I think a lot of people, this is flown under the radar, pun intended. What a lot of people don't know is that Avelo Airlines is now the preferred deportation airline of choice for the Trump administration. And yes, they're still like a low-cost consumer airline, but they are on the side flying people who have been rounded up by ICE on the streets of America without due process to other countries. And already in places like Santa Rosa, California, and other smaller airport locations that Avelo flies out of, there are protests already ongoing every weekend. So the model of Tesla takedown is being applied now to other arenas. And I want people to really think about what a difference we can make sideswiping at the administration through companies, providers, institutions that are doing its dirty work. Okay. Tesla takedown was clearly designed to take apart Tesla, right? To get Elon Musk out of government. And it's worked. Like, he's not really around much anymore. His, Doge boys are still hanging around a little bit, but he's not around much anymore. Simultaneously, we can go after Avelo and potentially do some real damage to the value of that airline by engaging in the same kinds of tactics that work so well with Tesla takedown. So there's already some opportunities available to engage in boycotts or protests here at local airports that Avelo flies to. Last night on Blue Sky, I posted a few links to those potential options. And you should go check them out because they're not at every airport, but they're at a lot of local and regional airports, and it's worth finding out if they're near you. Okay. But the one point that I wanted to make about this today, just from the standpoint of like How do we protest and organize, and how do we fight back? I've said many times here that, resistance at this moment, such as it is, I mean, you all know that I have like mixed feelings about that word 8.5 years on. But it's on multiple fronts, right? We have the courts, we have pushing our elected leaders to actually take action, which is still fundamentally really necessary. And then we have things like direct action, protests, boycotts. Another one, by the way, that has been very successful has been the blackout on Target, since they dropped support for LGBTQ rights, and they dropped all their DEI programs, and they cut their contracts for things like Black History Month. They have lost like 15% of their revenue since that boycott started. So that's, another example of something that has worked really well. But I just want to say this to all of you. Sometimes when people come onto the Patreon feed and ask me how to make a difference, it feels to me like some of you are looking for like a magic pill, right? Here's the one thing that we're going to do that's going to take everything down. And it doesn't work like that. The thing that people need to understand about the way successful resistance movements work and have worked historically is that they take time, and they take effort, and they take decentralized movement, and they take effort where you live. All right. So, I know, again, we talked a little bit yesterday about, the issue of a potential general strike, and how the general public of the United States is not yet ready for that. And how one of the ways that we get ready for that is by putting the building blocks in the wall in that direction through local and sustained action. Okay. So the thing to do, if you're interested in how do we fight back against all this, is to just do the next right thing, right? This part of it is not hard. I think the thing is that people want one of two things. They want either some great leader to rise and give everybody instructions on what to do, which actually would be profoundly dangerous. Like, let's just look at what happened in Navalny. Or they want there to be some like massive outpouring of outrage that ends up in the streets in some sort of sustained movement, which in this country is very difficult to sustain because people's health insurance is tied to their employment. And a lot of people can't just like be in the streets for weeks at a time, unlike the way that they can in other countries, because their employment is protected. Their health insurance is public, right? We have different scenarios here, but doing the next important thing, the next significant thing is always the right choice. And maybe that's making a donation today. Maybe it's calling your congresspeople or your senators. Maybe it's showing up to the Tesla takedown protest on Saturday. Maybe it's doing something in your own local community that makes a difference and moves the needle. I think people need to kind of stop expecting that there's going to be like one big thing that rises that's going to shatter this entire administration, and understand that every single part of us, our work, every single one of us, is a brick in the wall, and we've all got to do our part. And it's going to take like sustained effort over time. And it's also going to take demonstrating to people who are afraid to be in the streets, people who are maybe like worried about their own safety, or some of whom, by the way, should stay home. I'm just going to say this, like, we all know ICE is raiding protests and using like facial recognition software. They've been doing that since 2019. But also that people need permission to show up and do the right thing. And that permission can come from you. It can come from you being the person who goes to the Tesla takedown protests and posts photographs of like the signs on your social media. It can come from you being the person in your neighborhood who puts a sign in your yard, or volunteers at the food bank and tells your neighbors what you're doing. It could be you who shows up at the detention center to protest. Just like we talked about yesterday, how there's these ongoing massive protests here in Newark, New Jersey, right? Against the detention center where Ross Baraka was arrested. So again, people have to stop waiting for like yet again a kind of like salvation coming in to tell us all what to do and make it all better. The salvation is us. And frankly, I think part of the challenge of this moment, because I'll just circle back to something I said yesterday about like, I had more questions on the Patreon feed today about like David Hogg this, David Hogg that, this Bill Maher, blah, like stop waiting for leaders to be perfect, right? Whether you agree with David Hogg or don't agree with David Hogg is not the issue. Okay. The issue is whether or not our elected representatives are doing the right thing so their part of the wall is protected, and whether we're doing the right thing as individuals where we live to help push back. And I know that it's hard sometimes because people feel like these little things that they do don't make a difference. But I'm going to tell you, like, part of what's happening now is people are getting trained in a certain way, mentally prepared for more sustained direct action. And that helps people survive, right? It gives people hope. If you do it where people are locally, it saves lives. So, we have to kind of do the small next best thing. and make that choice in whatever way makes sense for you. Okay. No gesture is insignificant except like checking out entirely, right? You can donate money. You can show up for a protest. You can dedicate, 20 minutes a day to calling your reps. You can, volunteer at a local immigration rights coalition. You can show up to your local pride parade, which this year really matters a lot. If you are queer, go celebrate, be there. If you are not, show up to show your support. Okay. Show up especially for trans people. And, make sure that in everything that you're doing out in the world, you're trying to move the needle forward. You're trying to have conversations with people. You're showing your support for resistance efforts. You're using your voice for change. Okay. Because it's going to take millions of us doing this. And, we have to be able to empower others along the way. That's, by the way, what leadership looks like. It's funny sometimes when I talk about like movement leadership, people think I'm talking about like the person who's the executive director of the nonprofit. No, I'm talking about how you show up at the local potluck to make sure that your neighbors are informed. That's leadership. And I'm talking about being like, a linchpin in your local community pod to make sure people have food. That's leadership, right? And we all need to tap into the skills that we have to make a difference right now. So, I know that people are like still waiting for somebody to come along to make it all better. And the bad news about fascism is that it doesn't work like that, right? There's lots of bad news about fascism, but that's like one of the big ones, right? It's not like there's going to be like one salvationary moment or one salvationary leader. There's going to be lots of smaller moments and lots of smaller leaders until we get to the point where the resistance is sustainable for the long term and change happens. And nobody knows how that's going to take place. Honestly, this is the other thing. Like, I'm with Mariam Kaba. This is throw everything at the wall time. Try everything. If you're mad about a local policy at your city council, like, show up and give a speech. If you think your school board banning books is like unacceptable, show up and talk to the school board. By the way, you can do that at any school board meeting. A lot of people don't know that. There's all sorts of ways in which you can use your voice for change right now. And you just have to do the next best right thing. Okay. Just critically important, and not allow yourself to be dragged all the way down in the dumps. This is the other thing. Mindset is incredibly important right now. Don't allow yourself to be like dragged down by how dire it is. Like, we all know how dire it is, but part of the point of why they're doing everything they're doing is to keep us from thinking there's no hope, right? Or to make us think that there's no hope, rather, to keep us in a place of feeling like we have no power. That's the point. And so the way out of that is to do something, like just do the next right thing and, like move the needle. That's it. Okay. Good to see you all here today. Again, reminder, please give this broadcast a thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe and share it. Our viewership has been down this week for some reason. I don't know. I think people must be really, really tired. Normally we're at like 2,500 on here and we're hovering like between 1,000 and 1,200 live, which is fine. It's nice to see all of you. But reminder that you can like let the algorithm know that you like what we're doing here, because that will always help. Also, reminder, we do have available, it's linked down below in the show notes, and I'll put it in the comments after the broadcast, our free guide on how to lead for change right now without burning out. Really critical. It's gorgeous. Thanks to my team for designing it so well. And you should go and get it. All right. And as for the rest of it, I will catch you all back here live tomorrow. There will also be a progressive coffee/happy hour for all of our Patreon subscribers tomorrow at 3 p.m. Eastern. All right. I will see you all then. Enjoy the rest of your Thursday. Take care, everybody.